I'm the director of the Lutheran Hispanic Missionary Institute in El Paso, Texas. Our purview is to prepare leaders for multiplying healthy Hispanic ministries. And we do that in Spanish with online courses and workshops in person, although some of that has been curtailed due to COVID and things. And webinars and things like that. We also work with people who are already leaders in the church but wanting to reach out into the Hispanic community. And thirdly, every 3 years we have a conference also called PalmCon, Partners in Latino Ministry Conference. That's where the acronym comes. And it happens to be this year. Hopefully we'll be able to have the conference without interference from COVID. But it's in October. You are all invited to come. You can find out information on our website or just email me and I can send you information as well. For some of the Hispanics who, like in your circuit, if some of them do not have the economic wherewithal to come, we always offer some scholarships. We have a number of donors every year or every 3 years that help out, and we are able to offer some financial help for people that need to come.
What about if you have Hispanic folks that are Christian but not Lutheran?
That would be fine. Probably the scholarships, if we run short, would have to be reserved first of all for the Lutherans, but there may be some available otherwise. In past years, we have not used all the scholarship money. So, yeah. So that's me. We're here to talk about cultural barriers and getting past them. You know, my father was an Anglo through and through. His parents were both Germans. And the congregation where he was a member, he passed away several years ago. Congregation where he was a member, Ascension Lutheran Church, is just about as Anglo as they come. But there were Hispanics in Ascension Lutheran Church because of my father. He put Jesus' love into practice. He was always there helping out the neighbors. There were people that we did not know who came to his funeral and told us about things that he did in the neighborhood. He was always visiting people in the hospital, lending a helping hand. I can remember one time when we were just moving to El Paso, my father was up on the roof doing something at our house. And the neighbors, who were Hispanic, came over and thought he was someone we had hired and asked him to look at their roof. And he went over there and looked at their roof. So it didn't matter to him whether someone was Anglo or Hispanic or African American, Asian American, or from the North Pole. He kind of had a built-in radar at church that would find the people who were new and he would engage them in conversation. Well, not everybody's like that. And even though my father was that way, he was also kind of clueless when it came to cultural differences. There was one time a number of years ago where one of the Hispanic young ladies in our congregation, who actually came to the church because of family connections with our family, she had her 15th birthday party, which you know is for Hispanics is a big deal. And my parents got her a very nice present. And I can remember how they were complaining to my wife and I that they had not received a thank you note from this young lady. And they were saying, well, I guess she didn't appreciate that at all. And my wife, Maritza, who is from Venezuela, took some time and explained to her that that's not a thing amongst at least some Hispanics. In Venezuela, you don't send a thank you note. You verbally say thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, we're just going to borrow a few chairs.
Yep. You verbally say thank you, but it's almost what would you say? The sense is almost like, why would you give a gift just to get a thank you card?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And my wife said, well, since I've been here in the United States and I've seen what's going on, I think it's a nice idea to send a thank you card. I like it and I do it. But I never would have known that if I hadn't married Richard and, we hadn't encountered that. So I think from those anecdotes, I'd like to leave you with two things, and this is really the heart and soul of what I wanted to share with you. First of all, launch out. Even though there may be cultural differences, you can make a difference even if you don't know everything. And secondly, be aware that there are differences and that Christ has made us different, and yet He still wants us to work together. Now, before I get started, there we go. I'm going to stand over here out of the way. I just wanted to clear something up about terminology. Hispanic or Latino. If you want to get very, very picky, there are different nuances to these terms. For the U.S. Census, for example, Hispanic includes people who are from Spain, and it does not include people from Portuguese-speaking countries in Latin America like Brazil. Okay? But those are technical things. For the most part, most of us use these terms interchangeably. However, you have to be careful because there are some people who will insist on one term and be offended if you use the other term. For example, in the Pacific Northwest, they don't like the term Hispanic. I've never had anybody explain why. But in El Paso, we have a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So it just depends. And many don't like either term. They would want you to just say their country of origin. I think we need a term, though, because there are certain characteristics, sociologically speaking, that are common to a great number of people. So during this presentation, I'm going to use them interchangeably and trust that you guys will be sensitive to whatever the situation is where you live. Now, there are a number of issues related to cultural differences, like stereotyping and, well, the Bible. Okay, I'm passing this over. I changed my mind because I was going to go through some of these things, the stereotypes, the Catholicism, immigration, different generations, and all that kind of stuff. But I think that most of you are here because you want to hear the meat of the thing, which is the cultural differences and how we can get past some of that. These are, I see them anyway, as related issues. If you have a question about it at the end, we can come back. Okay? But I want to skip ahead here to, okay? As you can see, I'm cutting out a lot. There we are. Yeah.
Bless you.
Well, as I said before, there are some characteristics. Sociologists will be able to identify different characteristics and perspectives that Hispanics of many different kinds share, whether they are from Chile or Mexico, whether they are the first generation, the immigrants, or the second generation, the children of the immigrants. There are some characteristics that they tend to have in common that are different from those shared by many non-Hispanics, especially Anglos. I'm going to concentrate on the Anglos because we are by far the majority in our church body, but that doesn't exclude other ethnicities as well. Now, whenever we talk about cultural differences, we're talking in terms of generalizations, groups of people. Individuals may adhere to their culture on certain points and not on other points. So we shouldn't prejudge just because we're talking about cultural differences that everybody's going to be this way, or to us an extreme. We can't paint everybody with the same brush. However, at the same time, there are certain conflicts that arise and tend to show up again and again in ministry or just in life when different cultures try to work together. So we shouldn't prejudge, but we should be aware, not be clueless like my dad. The second point that I wanted to make is that love covers a multitude of sins. So we may make mistakes. My father made mistakes. We will make mistakes, in fact. But God can and will use us anyway when we are acting out of love. So it's a good idea to think through some of the cultural clashes that commonly occur between Anglos and Hispanics. Our reality is that we need to work together. Anglos, Hispanics, and any other ethnicity that you may want to add there. The first generation and the second generation. Rich and poor, men and women, pastors and lay people, technologically advanced like my daughter, and technologically dinosaurs like me. Here's an example, okay, just to kind of set things up. Well, let's say Peace Lutheran Church, a made-up name, okay. Almost all the members were white. But in the church's neighborhood, the Hispanic population was growing every year. And the members of the congregation, moved by Christ's love, wanted to share their faith with their Hispanic neighbors. So they planned some things out. They finally launched a social ministry to serve the Hispanic community. Eventually they found a Hispanic leader who began to make visits, home Bible studies, and a small Hispanic group began to worship services in Spanish at Peace Lutheran Church. Unfortunately, before long, problems arose between the Anglos and the Hispanics at the church. The Anglos began to complain that the Hispanics didn't take care of the church building and all the things that they had sacrificed so much to buy and were so careful of, especially in the kitchen. The Anglos felt that the Hispanics never ended their activities on time, so there were always scheduling conflicts. And some of the Anglos were disillusioned with the slow growth of the Hispanic group. They felt like they were sacrificing a lot for very few results. Furthermore, the Hispanics were not contributing very much as far as offerings were concerned. On the other hand, the Hispanics felt that the Anglos didn't take them into account. They had effectively no voice in the congregation. There was one token Hispanic on the church board, and that was it. All the important meetings were in English. After hearing so many complaints by the Anglos, the Hispanics started to feel like the Anglos didn't care about them as people. The only thing they cared about was their building and the material things that they had there. The Hispanics felt like they didn't have any freedom to organize their own activities. If I put the spoon in the wrong place, it's a big deal. Some of them felt like it was maybe the fact of the attitude of the Anglos that was resulting in the slow growth, because visitors would see that Hispanics were definitely second class in that church. So at Peace Lutheran Church, no peace.
Yeah, really.
Now, all of us grow up in a culture and subcultures, okay? We have a pattern that we learn from our parents and other people around us, and that we tend to assume is the way things should be. All of us think that our culture is the best. It seems natural. We judge other people based on our culture. And you know what? People see things differently. There's good and bad in every different culture. Some things are biblical and some things aren't. If you just live overseas for a while, you come back and you realize that it's not as natural as I thought, everything. So we need to get past the cultural differences. I need to ask God for help. I need to realize that my culture is far from perfect and start to appreciate some good things in other cultures. And then when there's a misunderstanding, to apply the Christian principles of reconciliation and forgiveness. We need to learn to appreciate our neighbor's culture and then look for ways to express Christ's love within that culture. So, living and working together just requires work. It's not easy. It's much easier to insist that other people change than to me make any changes. It's easier to get angry or feel hurt and nurse those kinds of feelings than it is to actually try to understand someone else's view and to forgive and maybe even ask for forgiveness and to love them. So, real unity is something that's hard. And it's something that I don't think we can do on our own. It's only through God that we can get something done. God does the impossible. Yeah? Jesus did the impossible. He died and He rose again for us, and He is the one who calls us to be His. And He's the one who's calling us to be one. So God's love, I think, can soften the hardest hearts, and when we trust in our strength, it's not going to work. When we trust in Him, that's when things can happen. So let's look at several areas where sometimes there are cultural differences between Hispanics and non-Hispanics, and mostly Anglos, have caused friction and conflict in ministry. And remember, please, that these are generalizations. Okay? You can't say that every Hispanic is a certain way. You can't say that every non-Hispanic is a certain way. But we do grow up in a certain culture. We do make certain assumptions. And if we are aware of those things, then we can talk to each other instead of talk past each other. So first of all, who are you? If somebody asks who you are, now once you get past the names, an Anglo will very often refer to his or her job or profession. Say, I'm a mechanic, I'm a welder, I'm a teacher, or whatever. For an Anglo, work is a source of identity. For Anglos, your personal value is wrapped up in what you do or you have done in life. Now, on the one hand, this can be a good thing. Okay, Martin Luther insisted that every person has a vocation, right? That is, God has called us to do different things in life, and whatever we do at work, you do for God. This has given rise to what they call the Protestant work ethic, and that's a good thing. Work is of value before God, and each person should be proud in a good way of what he's doing in the Lord. Now, this can be taken to extremes, right? There's what you call workaholism, where work becomes more important than anything else. It becomes your God. Sometimes even pastors, we can get caught up in our jobs and our family suffers. And you're nodding. So, on the other hand, many Hispanics derive their personal identity not from work but from their family. If you ask them who they are, they'll say, I'm Manuel's son. Okay? For many Hispanics, work is primarily a source of income, not a source of identity. And now, on the one hand, this is good, because if you are more holistic, you're more balanced, right? But on the other hand, it can result in work being so subsumed by family that it's not important at all, and you don't do it well for the Lord. You just put in your time and do the least you possibly can. Now remember, this is a generalization. You're undoubtedly going to meet Hispanics and non-Hispanics who do not fit this description, but it is an issue that often crops up in Anglo-Hispanic relationships. Some non-Hispanics feel like the Hispanics are lazy if they don't dedicate themselves to doing a really good job at work. Some Hispanics feel that the non-Hispanics are cold-hearted if they aren't ready to put their work aside for personal considerations. So there are good and bad sides to each way of looking at things. As we go through some of these, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Related to the identity question is the question of doing or being. Which of those two is more important in your life? You know, for many Hispanics, the principal goal in any activity is to build relationships with people. Hispanics tend to measure success in terms of good friendships and sharing. In other words, personal relationships. People are more important than the things one does in life. A Hispanic will be much more ready to interrupt his work for taking care of a friend or relative's needs. In business, many Hispanics often see nothing wrong in using their position to help people who are close to them. Well, they don't see anything wrong with nepotism, okay? Even if it's technically against the rules of their organization or company. In Latin America, very often the best way of getting something done is to make friends with the person who is in charge of it. Sociologists say that Hispanics have a culture of being. On the other hand, for many non-Hispanics, we have a culture of doing. The principal goal in any activity is to get the job done. We tend to measure success in terms of practical results. An Anglo, for example, will very often not want to interrupt his work in order to talk to people, unless the talking is related to work. Personal relationships are for someone's free time. If a non-Hispanic, especially an Anglo, uses his position at work to help a friend or a relative, it's often seen as something bad that you shouldn't be doing. Now, as an Anglo missionary in Venezuela, at first it was very difficult for me to put my work on hold in order to go and talk to people and spend some quality time building relationships. I often felt guilty when I wasn't working on my Bible study, or I wasn't working on my sermon, or worship, or something like that, in order to talk to people. I was wasting my time talking to people. But in the end, the talking was much more effective at getting something, producing any kinds of results than all of the other activities. So when it comes to starting a new ministry, Hispanics are very often concerned primarily with building better relationships and having success in terms of friendships and shared love. Often Hispanics don't understand why the Anglos and non-Hispanics are so caught up in the numbers game. You know, for us it's the metrics. How many people came? That's what means success or failure. Sometimes in the same meeting, the Anglos are going, this was a failure. Look how few people attended. And the Hispanics are saying, this was great. I deepened my relationship with so-and-so and so-and-so, and we talked and we were able to share. So remember, this is a generalization. It may not apply to the individuals you work with. It's just something that comes up. Another area where there can be conflict is cooperation or competition. You know, many Anglos and other non-Hispanics value individualism very highly, especially here in the United States. The independent, self-sufficient individual is the ideal. Competition is important. We say that it's good that there is competition out there and nobody has a monopoly. Unless a person is sick or incapacitated, every individual should work to provide what he needs in life. 2 Thessalonians 3, 6-10. Yeah. If that person doesn't do that, they're considered lazy. With non-Hispanics, if your family might help you out, right? But each person needs to be self-sufficient. Anglo families, for example, are proud when their children grow up and leave the house. And they become independent. They're on their own. If an adult is still living with his family, we make excuses. Oh, he's just getting his feet under him and he'll be moving out sometime soon. On the other hand, many Hispanics value the group more highly. The group, especially the family, where each individual depends on the others, that's the ideal. Cooperation is more important than competition in general. Now, often there is competition, but it's very often competition between groups, like soccer teams. The person who is not willing to share is selfish. He's not a true friend. Each individual contributes to the group. Now, with Hispanics, very often the family laments the time when the kids are going to be leaving the household. That's separation from the family. I've known young Hispanics who turned down full ride scholarships to prestigious universities because it would mean leaving behind the family, and their parents were not in agreement. Yeah.
There's with second and third generation Hispanic folks whose parents are from say Mexico or other places, where that second or third generation starts to get influenced by Anglo culture, and so this causes conflict within families. And
Yes.
I see that sometimes.
Yes, very much so. One of the things that I skipped over was the whole thing about the first and second and third generations. But that is a big issue.
Not only second and third, but the first one. I'm the first generation. And if I go to Colombia, completely different. Like when we go back to our countries, like you're really different.
Here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, my values are
Yeah.
different. I'm a Lutheran. You're a Protestant.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, now you're off in the
Yeah.
block.
Yeah.
Yeah, so by being here, you're influenced by.
Oh yeah. And we think differently now. I've been here for 30 years, so.
Yeah. We do get influenced by our culture a lot. My wife always laughed because we were in Venezuela, and when I would come back to the United States, I would start speaking in Spanish to everybody. And in church, we would want to give everybody hugs when these Germans are, no, keep your, this was even before social distancing.
One thing we have in common is beer.
Is what? Yeah, here, yeah, there you go. Now the thing about cooperation and competition in ministry, this can mean, now it doesn't have to, but it can mean that the Hispanic is going to find it difficult to become, like he said, a Lutheran. Because if your immediate family calls itself Catholic, even if you're only Catholic in name, your country is Catholic. It's your identity. Your friends maybe are calling themselves Catholic. It's not easy to leave the group behind, even if you are seeing things in a different light. Now, on the other hand, if a person does leave his group behind and becomes a Lutheran, very often the family follows sooner or later. In Venezuela, we were reaching out to a certain family in the barrios, in the slums, and one person finally became a Christian and became a member of our church, one of the youth, and they were railing on him all the time. But then another one came, and then another one, and then another one, and today you see the majority of the family is Lutheran. That means also that it's not uncommon, even here in the United States, for churches, congregations to be dominated, Hispanic congregations to be dominated by a certain extended family or two families. Yeah. Well, once again, it's a generalization, okay? You may, your results may vary. The sense of time. We all know that there's American time and then there's Hispanic time. Why is that? Well, Anglos and non-Hispanics in general, in the United States anyway, tend to view time as linear. Time has a beginning, it has an end, it goes by, it never comes back. You can never swim in the same river twice. Why? Because the water is gone. It's gone down downstream. That's how Anglos view time. And since for Anglos, time has a beginning and an end, it follows that it is a limited resource. It should be conserved. You do not want to waste time or lose time. Time is fixed. If you don't get something done today, you've lost your opportunity. You've lost your time. We need to hurry because time is running out. And Anglos then tend to be punctual according to the clock. Meetings start when it's time, like right now. 4 o'clock, we start. We have to be good about that. To not do that is to be inconsiderate of other people because you're wasting their time. In fact, there's an Anglo saying, time is money. On the other hand, most Hispanics consider time to be a cycle. The sun rises, the sun sets. The sun rises, the sun sets. One day leads into another. 1 week leads into another. 1 month leads into another. A year goes by. Time repeats over and over again. And since that is the case, go ahead.
Is this kind of similar to the biblical distinction between Chronos and Kairos?
It can be. I don't want to say that one is completely linear and another one is completely cyclical. I see Chronos as time in general and Kairos as an opportunity, but certainly there are distinctions to be made with regard to time. We tend to assume that everyone needs to see time the same way we see time. With regard to Hispanics, if time is cyclical, it follows that time is not a limited resource. It's an abundant resource. You shouldn't be so uptight about time. Time is flexible. If you don't get something done today, you got tomorrow. It's more important to enjoy the moment. Now, maybe that's where Kairos would come in. More important to enjoy the moment than it is to follow the clock and follow the agenda. Meetings begin when everybody arrives, not when the clock says. People are more important than the clock. Now, of course, these are generalizations, and there are exceptions. For example, many Hispanics are very punctual when it comes to arriving for work, as long as they're not the boss of themselves like a plumber. But if they're in a factory or something, they will be on time. But in social situations, and the church is a social situation, they don't feel that. Actually, in some situations, it's considered discourteous to arrive at the time when things are scheduled. I can remember in Venezuela, it took me a while to learn this, when somebody would invite me over for dinner at 7 o'clock, I soon learned that I better not be there before 8. Because if I was there at 7, they were still running around getting things ready. And it was awkward. Okay? On the other hand, my wife and I, when we came here to the United States and we were in El Paso, somebody invited us to dinner one time, and it was getting to be very close to the time. I was telling my wife, let's go, let's get in the car. And she was saying, no, they said 6 o'clock. They're not going to be ready now. And I kind of twisted her arm, and we got in the car, and we went over there. And the first thing that she said to the couple, it was an Anglo couple that invited us, was, "You didn't expect us at this time, did you?" I told my husband that we should be later on. And the lady said, "Oh, no, we're ready. I'm taking it out of the oven now. We can sit down." Yeah. So this has big implications for our church work. Obviously, for one thing, you don't want to schedule an Anglo event right after a Hispanic event. If you need them to... the worship services, right? Yeah. Furthermore, you need to be sitting down and discussing what it means for each group to be on time. If you have meetings that are going to involve people on different ends of this spectrum, you need to be aware that there may be some hurt feelings. You know, the Anglos are going to say, hey, these Hispanics don't care about us. They're not on time. And the Hispanics are going, these Anglos don't care about us. People are more important than the clock. Can't they realize that? Aren't they Christian? And so if you can get people to understand where each is coming from, maybe you can be a little bit more conscientious about meetings and other things. Okay. Another area, organization or spontaneity. Do you plan and organize your time and your possessions, or are you impulsive? Now, many Hispanics are spontaneous. They value that, impulsiveness. For example, they like to be spontaneous in their time. Okay? It's common to change your plans amongst Hispanics. You may say that you're going to be somewhere, but that actually means that you like the idea and you think you're going to be going there, but if something else comes up, you don't necessarily feel like you're obligated to go just because you said you would. Time management is more spontaneous. It's more important not to offend the people that you are with than to keep commitments that you may have made in the future. That means that sometimes if you're talking to someone and the worship service is starting, it's kind of hard to say, okay, stop, we are going to do something else. Yeah, you're saying no, that doesn't work. All right. Hispanics often are spontaneous in their possessions. They're not very concerned. Again, you know this is generalizations, okay? Sociology, not individuals. But they're generally not too concerned with where something is put away as long as it's clean and not sitting out, okay? I'm an Anglo. I've been in Hispanic ministry for so long, and my wife is Hispanic, but still, I go to the kitchen and I want to find something and it's not in the place that we've always put it. Maritza doesn't care if it's here or there, as long as it's orderly, as long as you don't have it sitting out on site, and as long as it's clean. And she thinks I'm very picky, because I want it in the same place so I can find it. I don't have to go through all the drawers. And she says, no, it's my kitchen. By contrast, most Anglos value order and organizations. That's not to say that we're all organized. It's just an ideal that we appreciate and strive for. In other words, don't go by my desk. Anglos tend to be organized in their time. They don't like to change plans at the last minute. I'm still this way. I make a plan, I want to do it exactly that way. My wife will come along and say, well, why don't we do it this way? It's better. I don't want to change my plans. You know, I really don't. Even when I can see that doing something different is better. Anglos often like to organize their possessions, like to put away things in the same place at the same, so that you can find it without messing around. Now, some non-Hispanic, some Anglos are messy and they don't keep their things in order, like I don't do on my desk, but they still appreciate that that's something to strive for. They feel guilty because they have a mess. There's an American saying, a place for everything and everything in its place. Now, kind of related to this is your view of life in general. Amongst Hispanics, they generally view life holistically. That is to say, as a whole. They don't divide their lives. One's work life and personal life are not separated so much. You're the same person, and so Hispanics may very well do business, personal stuff during business hours. In the same way, they don't separate the religious and the non-religious. I can talk about my faith at work. What's the problem? By contrast, very many times Anglos and other non-Hispanics in general live a compartmentalized life. They feel like every activity has its time. There's a time for work, there's a time for family, a time for God. When it's work time, you should be doing work things, not personal things, and, witness to God on your own time. Religious activities take place when you go to church. Now, again, I want to emphasize that these things are cultural generalizations, not necessarily any individuals. We have on our board of directors one man who is Hispanic, who is the most organized person and on time that you can imagine. He worked for the Pentagon for years and years and years. He is the one who organizes our planning. So people are not always what their culture is, okay? But at the same time, you can see how these things can crop up in the church. Very often, I've heard that big cultural clashes have occurred in congregations not because of what was going on in the worship service, but how they treated the kitchen downstairs. Yeah. Oh, these Hispanics, they are not putting things in their place. They don't take care of things. They don't care about us. Oh, these Anglos, they are so concerned about these nitpicky little things. Like, I have to put the spoon here or else it's a big problem. They just care about the things. They don't care about us. So you can see that that's something to kind of keep in mind. Another area of conflict is honesty. The Bible tells us that we are to speak the truth in love, Ephesians 4:25. But which one has priority? Truth or love? When push comes to shove, many Anglos value the truth more than love in personal relationships. Among Anglos, it's imperative and important to speak clearly and directly, especially when there's a problem to solve. Anglos don't value beating around the bush. When a person speaks too indirectly, non-Hispanics wonder what he has to hide. Clarity is good. In the same way, many non-Hispanics consider lying to be a pretty serious offense. Even little white lies are hard to justify to an Anglo. It's better to tell the truth, even if the truth hurts. Now, in spite of this, Anglos do often tell lies. But even when they do tell a lie themselves, they still believe that lying is wrong. It's just that they're basically honest, but the situation forced them to tell that lie. I had to say that because whatever.
I think Southern culture is a little bit closer to Hispanic.
Could be.
This stuff.
Yeah. I'm having to make wide generalizations so that you will see areas where there can be conflict, not that everything is going to be this way in every area.
Right.
Yeah. You just think about what happened with Clinton and Levinsky. One of the biggest problems that people had with Clinton was that he had lied about what was going on. Same thing with Nixon, right? Now, with Anglos, very often, friendships depend on being truthful with one another. If an Anglo catches somebody lying to him or her, they may let it go once or twice, but if it's going more than that, then this person better come repentant. Otherwise, I don't know if I want to continue that relationship. On the other hand, many Hispanics, love is more important than the truth. Amongst Hispanics, it's expected that people will speak indirectly, all around the point, particularly if there is a problem to solve. If you speak too directly, that can be offensive when there's a problem. It's a lack of respect for the other person. You have to listen very carefully to what is not being said. In the same way, Hispanics don't consider little white lies to be something bad. There was one time when I preached and I mentioned something about always speaking the truth, and my mother-in-law came back to me afterwards and said, "Ricardo, you have to tell little white lies. That's just loving. That's the grease of social interactions. If you don't do that, and she rightly pointed out that many times you Anglos do the same thing. You just don't recognize it. How are you doing? I'm great. Oh, it's good to see you when you really would rather not be there. Yeah. Okay. So it's very common for Hispanics to tell a little fib under certain circumstances in order to help a friend or a loved one. Okay? In order to make the listener feel good. In order to avoid the shame of making the mistake. Oh, okay. Good. I'm late because of traffic.
Yeah.
When there wasn't any traffic. Okay. Yeah, I can still remember going to one of our members' homes in Venezuela, and she was filling out an application for a credit from the government for housing, and she showed me and she said, well, I'm saying this, but it's not true, but if I don't say it, I'm not going to get the credit. So when the truth hurts, Hispanics often opt for love. It has been my experience with Hispanic patients and doctors that sometimes the doctors would prefer not to tell the person the truth that they're ready to die because they want them to enjoy their last days rather than be all distraught. So, like you said, you're always going to find exceptions to the rule. Let me just emphasize it's something that comes up. Different ways of looking at things. Another area is managing money. Many Anglos feel that friendship should not be mixed with money. The saying goes, lend a friend your money and lose them both. Friendship for Anglos does not imply any financial obligation. In fact, if an Anglo finds that someone wants to be his friend because he has money, he'll feel offended. Oh, he just wants me for that. Anglos do believe we have an obligation to help poor people and sometimes are very generous, but they're more likely to give to an institution where there is oversight than to an individual who asks for money on the street. Now you know that there's exceptions, okay? But that's the trend. By contrast, Hispanics do mix friendship and money. For Hispanics, good friends are those who share. In fact, often friendship implies that you're going to help them out monetarily. Godparents for baptism are often selected for their ability to pay for the party or help the person later on in life. Hispanics invest in friends more than banks. Now, in the church, also, Anglos often like to manage money in an organized way. They feel like you have to handle the money according to the rules. The rules exist to curb abuses, to protect the funds that people have sacrificed to give. So they want to see that money is going to be used for ministry and not for personal needs of the treasurer's family. Furthermore, although many Anglos do not tithe, they understand about stewardship and they agree that's what they should be doing. By contrast, Hispanics tend to put people first and rules second. People's needs are often messy. They're disorganized. A Hispanic is very likely to break the rules if he feels keenly the need suffered by an individual. Yes?
Question. How do they tax in some of the Latino?
How do they tax?
Yeah, I mean, we have an income tax. Do they do?
Some of them do. In Venezuela, there is an income tax. And there is a tax on a sales tax, which is 15% and going up. Well, Venezuela's a mess. I don't know about many of the other countries. In Colombia, they have a. I know they have a sales tax in Colombia.
The sales tax is high. I mean, property taxes is outrageous.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. So it's the same.
But I'm just wondering, because of these cultural differences, does the government use different means to get money then.
to collect the money. So it's easy to evade taxes paying like in Colombia?
Yeah.
I don't know how it is in Venezuela.
But if you think about it, I don't think people are making enough money to survive monthly. So it's always the white lies. We need to cut some corners somewhere to survive day to day. And it's easier for us to say, you know what, that's not the right way to go. That this is the only way for them.
Yeah, even if it's a rule, you're more likely to break that rule because of felt needs.
Well, even here, like you were saying, in the beginning, I was having a food drive, government food. I have Anglos and BMWs in front of me.
Yes.
I mean, well,
Yeah.
maybe they lost the job because of the pandemic. Maybe I can't judge, you know. And my eyes didn't look good, but I said, Lord, don't let me see with my eyes. Let me see with my call.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is very true. That is very true. You know,
See the same thing.
yeah, it's almost a meme that we cheat on our income taxes here in the United States.
Oh, they do it too. I mean, how
Yeah.
many people, Anglos, and I've seen they collect money, someone, pastors,
Yeah,
Anglo pastors, Lutheran pastors, having the money here and money under here. And just, I want to help your group.
Yeah.
And everywhere money.
Wow.
I mean,
yeah,
it just, and if you're doing it and your parish is doing it, it's bad.
yeah. And still, even though you know, what we could say would be Anglos tend toward this area. Hispanics tend toward this area. Is that not to say that the Anglos are never over here,
Yeah.
or that the Hispanics are never over there?
And what you value is not necessarily what you do.
Yeah,
I mean, we have certain things that we would agree, like you said before, is right. But then when it comes down to, I can save a few bucks by doing this, then some people are
Yeah.
willing to set their values aside thinking nobody sees them.
well, it's like, here's an illustration. You're the church treasurer. You have control over the money. And someone comes that is destitute and is a person that you know. It's a friend of yours or maybe a family member of yours. And according to the rules, you can't give them anything because they have to do this, that, and the other thing and be approved, and it'll be a month from now before they get anything, if they even get anything. Okay, if you're an Anglo, you will tend to say to that person, I can't do anything with the church's money. I'll try to give you something myself, but I can't do anything with this. A Hispanic will tend to say, I got the money, I'll give it to you. You need to get it back to me before the month is done because I have to justify it.
It doesn't happen anyway.
Yeah.
They don't bring it back.
Yeah. So, you know, that's the thing. People over rules. Also, when you're talking about the church, many Hispanics have come from a Roman Catholic background where you don't do stewardship. You do alms, which means whatever you happen to have that's extra, you give it to the poor and you feel good about yourself. In most Roman Catholic churches in Latin America exist and thrive on the gifts of wealthy donors, government sometimes, subsidies or other perks, investments, land that they have, and all kinds of other things, but they don't necessarily exist or keep afloat financially because of the sacrificial giving of all of their members. So you can see that that's also giving us some misunderstandings in the church. Another one. This is number 8. There's 10. And we still have time. Context. Sociologists say that Anglos are very low context. Almost, especially Anglos of German ancestry are almost at the very end of this spectrum. Hispanics, like many Oriental cultures, are a high context culture. Now, what does that mean? Context includes, well, every event, every activity has a context. Context includes the environment, the place, decorations, background, all that kind of stuff. The procedure, how things are done in the event, appearance, what are you going to wear? How are you going to present yourself? Gestures, your body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, all that kind of stuff. Now, for Anglos, then, in general, context is of lesser importance. It's still important, okay? I'm sure that you guys remember that are pastors, you remember going through and they say, make sure you shine your shoes and all that kind of stuff. It's still important, but it is not nearly as important as it is for Hispanics. The details may be important, but they're not as important as the event itself. And Anglos tend to separate the content of the message, okay, from the context of the message. The important thing is the message itself, not the surroundings. Furthermore, for Anglos, one's private life is kept separate from their public life. On that basis, for example, some people defended President Clinton with the Levinsky thing by saying, oh, that's his private life. He in his public life, as president, that has nothing to do with that. Now, that doesn't really make much sense. If someone's dishonest privately, they're probably going to be dishonest in their public persona as well. But that's what people justifies it as, because the context of someone's conduct outside his job as president, that's not as important for Anglos. In public speaking, Anglos tend to value direct and concrete speech. Pretty and eloquent words, yes. We like to be effective and inspire people, but that's not as important as speaking clearly so that the listeners understand. By contrast, for Hispanics, the context of the event is highly important. In some cases, it can be more important than the event itself. The details, where the gathering takes place, what decorations used, how the people dress, where one is seated, those are just as important as the event itself. They view the event as a whole, not separated. Furthermore, Hispanics tend not to separate the private life from the public persona. That's just the same person. They view them as the same. In public speaking, Hispanics tend to value eloquence a lot. Beautiful words contribute to the context of the speech. And it doesn't matter so much if the speech is hard to understand. It's the listener's obligation to understand the speech. I ran into this in Venezuela, not so much with the public speaking, although that was the case as well. When I tried to train pastors, they were starting to preach like the politicians did, and basically saying lots of beautiful things without saying anything. But I found it with regard to the newspaper. There were people that had a hard time reading the Bible out loud, and they loved the newspaper that was full of these words that they didn't understand. I said, what happened to be clarity? But it was not as important as the way it was expressed.
To confirm what you're saying, when you came to our church in Arkansas, I was leading the church with our pastor, and we brought people to preach. And when you preach, the way you preach, the calmness, the presentation was eloquent. And everybody likes you the most. Not because you're here, but everybody's like, oh, that was sweet. In my idea, even now, it's like, they were right. It's like, now I understand what that is. To this point, I just realized that eloquence value. Because sometimes I look at my culture as very, not very intellectual culture. There's people like South America, there's more education, but Central, I didn't see it, but it's right. Eloquence.
Yeah, now, there are good things and bad things in each culture. And I think that one thing that we probably would insist on is clarity when it comes to preaching the Word of God, because we have another agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can do the eloquence thing, but we need to be very clear about what the Lord wants. And I see that happening, or at least I saw that happening in Venezuela at least, that little by little people were putting the preaching in a different category as the politicians and the newspaper and everything else. And they were starting to come around that, okay, this is an area where we want something different. Now,
Is it the high context, like with the formality? Is
it
that
can be.
related to
Yes,
that?
it can be. So in ministry, for example, this means that if you want to recognize a Hispanic for his contributions in the church, it's probably not a good idea to just announce it at the potluck in the church basement. You know, you may need to think about what is the context of this. Maybe it needs to be done in the worship service and with a nice little certificate that you can formally give to the person. You know, that makes a lot more impact. Now, it doesn't mean that every Anglo is informal or every Hispanic is formal, but it just, if we want to work together in Christ, it's helpful to know what our co-workers and others are thinking. Okay. 2 more, if that's all right. It's 5 o'clock. We're supposed to go to 5:30, but you were going to say? No. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I think we can do 2 more, and if you have questions, okay? Authority is another area where there are differences. Anglos in general are used to shared authority. They value equality, democracy, even in the church, okay? The people have the ultimate authority. Now, I know that our theology has the pastor, and you know, there's variations to this, but in general, we feel like the people have the authority. The leader has to persuade the people to follow him. By the same token, the people have responsibility for the decisions. They own the decision-making process. When people make decisions in a group, Anglos tend to freely express their opinion, even if it goes against what the leader wants. The Anglo ideal is to treat everyone in the group equally and give them a chance to speak and to vote, whether they are powerful leaders or the weakest members of the group. And many Anglos, therefore, are comfortable with ambiguity in leadership because they know that no matter what, they're going to have a voice. And by contrast, Hispanics very often are accustomed to a hierarchy of leadership. That's particularly in the case of Hispanics who come from certain Latin American countries. For Hispanics, the leader has the ultimate authority. The people need to go along with the leader. Now, it's a vice versa thing. The leader has the responsibility to figure out what the people need and to give them what they need. Okay? Otherwise, they're going to complain behind his back. But the most powerful person, the most influential person, the leader, that's the one who makes the decisions for the group. Now, so Hispanics, when they're in a group and they're making a decision, tend, please listen to that word, tend to support the leader in public, and if they have criticism, they will voice it in private later. They treat influential people differently. Hispanics are not likely to voice public disagreement with the leader. And they're not generally comfortable with ambiguity in leadership. They want to know who is in charge here. Yes?
Does this then factor into leadership training and pastoral development?
Yes. Yes.
Elaborate on that.
In many Latin American countries, the different companies, different organizations have noticed that it is very tough to train up middle management. Okay, I'm in charge or I'm not in charge, but middle management, it's a difficulty. And in the church as well, you know, to try to communicate servant leadership on the part of the pastor. Yeah, it is a challenge.
We
Okay. Well, it's a challenge among Anglos too, for that matter. So you can see that this can sometimes cause hard feelings. I mean, the Hispanics may be uncomfortable when these Anglos in the group are, freely voicing their disagreement without regard for whether somebody's feelings are hurt or what the leader wants. What are they doing? And on the other hand, the Anglos may think that the Hispanics are hypocritical because they said yes in the meeting and then afterward they say no.
Because I think they view that as a lack of respect to the authority.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't be disrespectful to that person.
And many Hispanics can become impatient with the rules and regulations that are involved in the church. One time, there was a lady at a church in El Paso who wanted to start a children's ministry in her congregation. And she complained to me that the pastor and the other leaders in the church did not want to support her at all, but they didn't have the cara, they didn't have the face to say so. So I asked her, well, what is your plan for ministry? She didn't have one. In fact, she had not even talked with the church council. She had just mentioned this to the pastor. And, in her eyes, the pastor was the leader. The pastor would either say yes or no. And the church council would rubber stamp it, and then you would start to get a plan and figure out where the finances would be coming from. So I tried to explain to her how the Anglo church polity worked, and I sat down with her. We put together a plan, and she presented it to the church council. It was immediately approved, and they got going. We should not assume that Hispanics will by nature understand and be able to navigate the power structures that we are accustomed to as Anglos. That means that for you as a circuit visitor, that may be something that you can help the Hispanic leaders with. They may feel like they have no voice, nothing. Yeah, maybe they just don't understand how they can have a voice.
Exactly. I see that a lot. I think nowadays, I think we kind of have this mentality that we think that you think that we're inferior, but it's not the reality. It's just an assumption that we have. It's a assumption, a wrong assumption of things. And I think I don't care if there's a black, white, yellow, orange president. It's a person adequate for that job. That's the most important thing. And no matter if it's Hispanic or black, Anglo, whatever, that person right for that job. And whether it be a pastor, a deacon, but they take it. I think we like to use, especially minority, we like to use that wild card discrimination. It's the easy way out. It's the easy way out. And in reality, if you look in our countries, it's the same thing. So there's no discrimination about race, there's discrimination about levels of society.
Okay, so, question. If Anglo Church has a trained Hispanic pastor who's working ESL, developing an ESL program, trying to bring them into the same Anglo service and adapt and translate and so forth. But the bigger question I wonder is, which is going to be a better arrangement, that the Latino pastor is self-employed and getting 1099s, or is an employee of the congregation getting a W-2? Does that even make a difference?
I don't know that makes a difference.
It doesn't make a difference. But unfortunately, most of the Hispanics we don't get this school as going to seminary 4 years. Of course, it's going to be a difference. But even after you go 4 years, the pay scale that we average in Texas, some people were paying not even minimum wage to pastors.
Mm-hmm.
The Hispanics will work you 80 hours. They will work, I mean,
Yeah.
Well, see, I guess the reason that I thought it might make a difference is because of, if I'm an employee, I have a boss.
Ah,
They tell me what to do.
uh-huh.
If I'm being contracted as a self-employed, then I am the boss.
Of me, yeah.
And
I don't know if the method of payment is so much important as having clear lines of authority. Okay, are you in charge of this ministry, and who is your boss? Is your boss the pastor, or are you independent? You know, if you answer the question, who is in charge of what, it will be very helpful for the Hispanics. There was a church in El Paso, Cross Point, that started a Hispanic outreach, Spanish language worship service, and they were unclear about who was in charge. Obviously, the pastor was the pastor, but he was delegating a lot of the Hispanic stuff, because he didn't speak Spanish very well, to his head elder, and they brought on a secretary who was Hispanic for that part of things. There was never any clarity as to who was in charge, and there were big infighting between the elder, the secretary, who was in charge here, and overflowing to the praise band because they wanted to decide what they were going to sing or what they weren't going to sing. Because they weren't clear, that was one of the major problems that folded that ministry.
yeah, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. And I think if you can look in your state rules about hiring someone like that, in my state, in Texas, you have to be careful how you word on your boss, because the way you're paying. If you're gonna change, you have to have a project and just tell them, this is what I want to accomplish. Like when you hire a contractor, you do this. Because you got to be careful. This is a legal thing that we have 10 attorneys in our church, and all of them sit down and okay, let's make sure that the pastors who are paying, self-employed, we get the right words, because it can be a lawsuit from the county. And the thing that we're struggling, that I see more happening, people that call me, it says, hey, I just don't know what to do. I don't know who my boss is.
Mhm.
This person he's the one that's paying me, but this person wants to do this and this, and they don't say anything. But they're looking for another way out.
Mhm.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I gotta go. But it's, so it's understanding that. Okay, are we clear now? Because, like again, like we were talking about, like you guys like everything organized and beautiful. We can learn that. But if you're not practicing that, then the domino effect. I mean, if you're not doing it, you just wanna do it.
When I started at the Lutheran Hispanic Missionary Institute, I had 3 bosses. I had my own board of directors. I was responsible to the Rocky Mountain District, which was supporting, and I was responsible for LCMS National Missions. I'm an Anglo. I don't have any problem with that. I give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and I knew what I had to do for each of my bosses, and that was fine. That would be very difficult for Hispanic in general. You can probably find Hispanics that would be perfectly comfortable with that, and you can find Anglos that wouldn't. Okay. Last thing, spiritual worldview. In their view of the world, Anglos tend to see spirits, saints, demons, other supernatural beings apart from God itself, that they are of little importance. In fact, there's a fair number of Anglos who don't even believe that such beings exist. When faced with something beyond their understanding, Anglos are usually reluctant to attribute it to supernatural forces. They like to find a natural explanation, no matter how implausible. When you're sick, when you're facing difficult problems, you don't consider going to a spiritist or a witch. Now, some anthropologists say that this is, well, you got God, you got natural things, and the middle is missing. They call it the missing middle. it's sometimes difficult for Anglo-Christians to deal with all the exorcisms that Jesus performed in the New Testament. They tend to think that, well, how can we explain that? Maybe some of those were mental problems, and they just were called exorcisms. Maybe there was something else going on there. Or maybe the demons were more active when Jesus was walking the earth and not so much today. Now, this is changing in recent years. You know, maybe Wiccan is growing and Spiritism is growing, New Age and all kinds of stuff. But even with these changes, I think Anglos are less likely to see the middle. By contrast, Hispanics are generally seeing supernatural beings as very important. Many Hispanics believe God exists, He's up there, and if I go to church, I'm going to be kind of good with Him, but He's not all that interested in my daily life. I need intermediaries for that. It's not all that uncommon to see people who are professing Christians in Hispanic groups and going ahead and seeing other areas for looking for help. I had an Old Testament class one time. We were talking about the Psalms and how different spiritists and brujos, warlocks and witches, would misuse the Psalms. And every single person in my class could give examples that they had witnessed. Everyone. So, in the church, Anglos may feel like the Hispanics are superstitious. The Hispanics may believe that the Anglos are clueless. Yes?
In the Caribbean, like Puerto Rico, they have the Santeria. Do they have anything like that in Mexico?
There is Santeria in Mexico. There is a lot of stuff that the global network is facilitating the interchange of sects and cults as well. But Mexico, I would see Mexico more along the lines of Spiritism and de la muerte, la Santa Muerte.
Yeah, well, in Santa Maria, in Cuba is the dominant for Santeria.
Yeah,
Cuba.
yeah.
Can you explain the Dios de los Muertos?
I'm sorry?
The Day of the Dead?
Yeah. Well, the Day of the Dead is it's mostly Mexican. I don't know, do they have it in Colombia?
No, we don't.
No, in Venezuela they didn't
The
either.
Day of the Dead and
And la Santa
la
Muerte.
Santa Muerte. That's
Pues
the
sí,
difference.
Santa Muerte.
Well, the Santa Muerte is something that has come up, especially with the narcos. They're looking for that as their patron spirit. The holy death.
Yeah.
Holy death.
Intercession too.
Yeah.
Somebody intercedes.
Intermediary, yeah. With regard to the Day of the Dead, it's a day when many feel like the spirits of the defunct people will be roaming around. And so, yeah, kind of, a little different. Halloween was not necessarily the spirits of the dead so much as evil spirits, but yes.
And in Colombia is mixed in the Roman Catholic Church, like Tuesday in our city, Medellin, there's a church that all the killers will go, bring their bullets, and she says you pay money, you get this candle, put wax, open the bullet, put poison, then you put the wax to seal the poison, and they pray and they give money to the church. I'm going to give you 10% of whoever killed.
Yeah.
Every church is,
It's-
so every country has their own unique way of doing it, kind of the same.
Yeah. Well, Hispanics have a saying, cada cabeza es un mundo. Every head is its own world. We all see things differently. And sometimes one is right and one is wrong in certain situations, but more often than not, we just see things differently. And we need to cut each other some slack in order to share Jesus' love. And when misunderstandings raise their ugly heads, we need God's forgiveness and we need to share His forgiveness with each other. Now, it seems like a lot of challenges, but here's the good news, okay? First of all, you're not alone. Where have I heard that before? Yeah, God is with us, okay? And others are with us as well. And secondly, you don't have to be perfect. I have a book called Juggling for the Complete Klutz. It came with 3 little bean bags, and the very first chapter said, take the bean bags in your hand, throw them up in the air, watch them fall. This is called the drop. Get used to it. It's going to happen a lot. We will make mistakes, okay? But the important thing is what? To realize when that happens, ask for forgiveness, give forgiveness, and change. You know? Figure out better ways of doing things. We have God's leading. We have the willingness to learn. We have to correct the wrong things along the way. You know, my father, who was clueless, there were still many Hispanic families that felt Jesus' love through him. So, any other questions that we haven't had before? It's been a long session. Thank you for your attention. I think I'll look for ways to summarize it more next time.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the screen here, this is the website. If you want materials, they're free.